Alex, Azim here. I think from what I see, the shift that you are working on seems quite dramatic. How do you actually work with the different countries to prepare to work differently? Are they working? Do they build their own internal capability, or do they have the right people with the right mindset to move this forward, especially in countries like in Indonesia, Pakistan, etc.? How do you get how do they prepare their people to work on this area?
Well, obviously, it wouldn't be fair if I would say we have a blueprint for this, right? It depends, and the journey is just started. So, but I think there are several criteria that we are looking at, and this actually refers to many other public sector organizations and innovation, not only to this particular project. One of those is really about the question of leadership. And identifying champion in the government who would have enough of political weight, but at the same appetite, and some sort of a team that is interested to drive this forward, right? For various reasons, for reason of political importance of the task at hand, for the reason of learning new skills and capability, for the reasons of visibility. Usually, it's a combination of different motivations that is at core for it, and we. Obviously, this is to a certain degree, as you say, dramatic. We use the word cutting edge thing. And to that extent, I think we obviously cannot have all the right talent inside the government. I don't think we ever, anywhere have at this point of time, a right talent all combined together. That would be too much of a luck to have. But I think what we are trying to see, and generally with innovation, I think one of the key things is that there are different ways to bring expertise. Sometimes it can come from outside. What is really critical is also what we call the competence of policy entrepreneurship. People who can understand this, who can get things done, and who have tenacity and guile to drive it through the bureaucracy and through the change. So I think rather than looking for a particular set of skills, we are trying very much to look at the competencies that include kind of a more soft type of competencies in this sense. Obviously, I would say another thing is that, as I said, this dramatic transformation often not only about government, but also what is ecosystem around government. So what we are looking at is ability of the government to connect and to mobilize, to work together with the ecosystem. We don't expect government to have all the resources or skills. This is why this connection and ability to build a common narrative with the ecosystem is so critical. I would give an example of another project that we are doing in several other countries in Asia around plastic pollution and circular economy. And there we start with the kind of this systemic design conversation, actually putting a right frame to the question, right? What we don't want is just a focus on what will be the technology or a very quick fix solution to a particular problem if we take a complex issue, right? Don't get me wrong, some of things require quick fixes and this is fine. Some of them are different and this is what we are trying to focus on. So in these places, we try to start the conversation involving ecosystem and providing a frame around system, right? Once the frame is around system, the understanding of the ecosystem where they need to look for softly, slowly shifts from technology or from infrastructure or whatever is the hard stuff to softer stuff. What are the attitudes and behaviors we want to support through different means, right? Through behavioral science, through regulations, and through investment. So I think this would be the third key element is the relationship with the ecosystem. And obviously the last thing, how we develop those skills, I think the great thing is you can learn a lot when you do things, right? So people who want to do things and have enough of brain power, they will learn on the go. Many of those things are so new that this is perhaps the only way for the public sector to develop it.
I think in the conversations that we've had together with Nesta, sometimes they say it's much easier for you to actually choose the right people to be part of the team rather than to try to change the mindset or to develop those competencies from existing teams. So sometimes that's an option, I think, to think about. Whether from an organization perspective, whatever the organization is how do you actually choose the right people to be part of it? Because then from a mindset perspective, you're sort of already on the right path. And it's much easier because skills are easy to develop. But the mindset is the more challenging one, I would say, to actually shift for a lot of individuals. Are there any questions from our guest?
Yes, good afternoon. It's Ross Gilmore.
Hi, Ross.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, is the use of readiness assessments, innovation readiness assessments, a common practice to evaluate the receptiveness of organizations to embark on innovation programs?
Can I just clarify, are you looking at organizations more from a government or ministry perspective?
Could be anyone. It's just that my experience in Asia has been that organizations believe they have ambitious goals, but then when you actually go and evaluate what their desired starting point is, it's often something much smaller than the bigger stated ambitions that they feel they need to express.
I think based on our experience, it is not widespread as we would like it to be. However, I think we see a lot of movement and a lot of initiatives to actually begin that. So our approach ourselves is to actually usually start with a readiness assessment. So even for the public policy perspective, sometimes you start them with, how do you actually identify the right people to be part of the team? How do you identify the right talents to actually be in that change team? Alex, would you like to share some of your insights that you've basically underwent?
Yeah, sure. I think it's an interesting question, and I'm kind of divided on this. On readiness assessments, we will be deploying it on our joint work on digital transformation together with the government. Again, looking not only at the technical capability or technical IT talent, right, but also the political ownership, budgetary framework supporting digital transformation, capability of the team to deliver, to what extent this is a shared mandate, to what extent the team is working towards ecosystem and is able to engage users in some of the digital transformation efforts. So there is an interesting Harvard-based framework that is used by some of the digital transformation teams across the world that I found very useful, and this is what we will be trialing with a couple of governments in Asia. We've never done such innovation readiness assessment, and to a certain degree, I think it's an interesting way because we still understand that as sometimes there is a lot of demand from different teams, for us, from the country office, for instance, to work on innovation. And the team that is kind of a bit of a support and service provider, facilitator, has limited resources. Having a tool to to triage some of the demands and to be able to focus on really strategic bets in terms of transformation, I think really important. And we have started looking at it. Maybe not from the perspective of readiness assessment, I would call kind of elements for transformation. Things that I alluded to before, leadership engagement. To what extent our particular innovation team is connected to the country office and the program as such. To what extent it's connected to the ecosystem outside of organization. So looking rather maybe not at to what extent technically they're ready to embrace it, more politically. This is something where we should be investing, right? If we take this perspective, the skills can be developed on the go. And I think the second element here is also kind of this learning by doing, where we have been inside our organization. So we found it much easier not to focus conversation with a partner or with the senior manager of organization, not to focus on it on innovation as such, but to focus on a particular issue where the traditional approaches fail. Try to embed these new innovative approaches into the work around this issue, and through this way, perhaps a bit insidiously, help the partner internalize innovation approaches, and then start talking about value of innovation and so forth. Right? So there are different ways, and I think what is really important for us is, if we don't want just a good innovation project, but actually a transformation of an organization in terms of innovation, sometimes tactics may be better to focus on a particular issue, use innovation approaches to work, expertise, and so forth, and then based on this, start building kind of a big innovation agenda. It depends perhaps also where the leadership stands of the respective partner.
Perhaps if I could add on, so in our line of work, Ross, what we have done is to actually divide the assessments, basically in terms of capability, where it's more focused on the individual and leadership also. And also, of course, of the capacity of the organization. So really to look at the readiness of the organization structure and how things are structured for them to actually be able to embrace the innovation that is required.
Just to share further, I think back in 2013, 2014, we worked with the Malaysian National Innovation Agency. They wanted to measure innovation readiness of the state-owned enterprise, the GLCs, and companies which has strong national interest. So what the government did together with us was to create a series of more than 38 measures to look at current innovation performance, the level of investment and innovation, and also the output, tangibles and intangible outcomes of innovation. We even looked at a formula to look at a return on investment from a share price, because what we found that companies which was deemed to be innovative, their share price was much higher compared to a non-innovative company over a period of 3 to 5 years.
Magnus, perhaps you can share some of the challenges that you face in terms of organizations who are embarking on this ISO journey.
Yes, certainly. And I do think that Azim, you brought up kind of the key barriers here. It's bureaucracy, silos, and also the mindset, the cognitive biases that are kind of standing in the way. We see that to kind of break through those barriers, we need new tools. It doesn't happen by itself. An innovation management system that is used as a reference or as a starting point for an organization can actually be a tool to question and to move beyond these limitations. But I also have a question to you, Azim, regarding your presentation, because when we look at these barriers and what has happened during the last year, during the COVID-19 crisis, we see that we have kind of breaking down some of these barriers, or a lot of these barriers, and changing behaviors in many different ways. How do you see that as a sign for what to come in the next 10 years? I think that would be interesting to think about.
One of the I think biggest challenge that we experienced during the pandemic, because we're doing a lot of consulting work during the session, is that companies are now more open to do work digitally. They are empowering a lot of their people to work at home, but they don't know how to behave. How do you lead digitally? They don't have the and secondly, they don't have the right infrastructure to be able to work virtually. So it was quite fascinating for us that we find that with mobile technologies, with what they call that, with broadbands everywhere, that people are comfortable working from anywhere. But we found that even pockets in the city, because of a sudden surge of demand for internet and lack of need to actually work on face-to-face or online, that people were actually blown away. How do I move forward? There's a lot of stress going on, a lot of Zoom calls, not going to office. So it's still at that infancy stage. So this is where I believe that guidance needs to be provided. So what are the rules? What are the terms of engagement when you are going online. I think one of the clients that we were working with, I think in Asia, we actually had to teach the people from different countries how to actually use Zoom, how to use different tools to start working collaboratively online. There's even, I think one of my team members was sharing with me one of their organization, the organization that she knows the parents work for. They're still using typewriter for the purpose of security. And that company is designed, they are very particular about safety, that nobody actually have an email account. Everything is done through paper. So they are struggling. How do you move forward? They are immobilized work in that area. However, it's also a flip side. We've been working with one of the ministries in Malaysia, and we actually, over the past few months, we had a lot of virtual meeting, and we find that the virtual meeting was much more productive. A lot of people could join, and meetings were shorter, much more concise. So it begins with a mindset shift. That's my view.
I've got something else to share, I think, also in terms from a mindset perspective and the next decade, certain trends I think that we need to look at. What we see is level of collaborations, the need for communication would become much more emphasized, I think. Where else, if you to look at the education system, especially in Asia, we're pushing so much towards science. We're not really, I think, putting enough emphasis in terms of the arts, in terms of creativity. And I think this is going to take its toll in the years to come. Probably not in the next 1 to 2 years, because you won't see, I think, the impact so soon. But definitely, I think within the next 5 years or so, you'll actually see this, because there is, I think, a lack of alignment in terms of what is going to be needed in terms of competencies for the future and what is being generated at our higher education institutions. So I think that's going to be a key issue which organizations, whether public sector or private, will have to actually address.
Right. Yes. Time now is 5:40. I'd like to invite Alex to join our session. We can start our panel discussion, and then while that's happening, anybody who has a question, you can ask any of us at the session. So any questions from the floor? Right. If not, I have a question I'd like the panel to share with me. Is from your own personal perspective, let's not talk about 10 years, maybe next 2 to 3 years, how would work look like for you and for your team, that now we are extremely comfortable working from home? So for example, I think our company now, instead of saying work from home, we have a vision of work from anywhere. It doesn't really matter. But for me, what is key is the trust that I have of my team members. So for me, the future next 2 to 3 years is how do we create trust with somebody who we never met face to face before, because now everything is digital. So that is my take on area that I need to figure out. How do I hire somebody whom I can't interview face to face, or they are based in another country, and how would work look like for my team in the future? Okay, so I'd like to maybe start with Alex. Okay, if you can share, what do you see work life will be like for you next 2 years?
Well, perhaps I'm a bit less sanguine, Azim, about working from home and working remotely. I do miss interaction with people in the field. I think while obviously we understand that a lot of certain degree, to a certain degree, physical interactions were not needed, right? And there was too many face-to-face meetings, travels, and all this kind of stuff. And it's obviously should be balanced. And we really can do quite some things from home as effectively as we would do from office. So I think this will obviously impact the way how the offices look like in the governments, in development organizations, and so forth. Perhaps this is actually an interesting question, both mentally, how we handle it. This is a question also to urban design and to the way how the physical spaces are shaped. Right, this clearly will be a transition around that. And we as individuals, we know how much we depend on physical environment, how our behavior is influenced by it, and so forth. So I think there will definitely will be rebalancing in this sense. But the challenge where I see is that this coming too sharp, and in one generation, I think it's very difficult to adapt, right? Because shifting completely to remote work is adaptation, right? It's a social evolution that requires much more time than what we experience it now during 1 year. And we clearly will have mental challenges to adapt to it. I really hope we will be coming out of pandemic, we'll be able to share the things that we didn't need, but in terms of unneeded travel, unneeded meetings and all that, but at the same time, we'll be able to still maintain some of the physical interaction because this is what we need in the team. There is so much, things can go much more effectively when several people from one team are in the room and can work together on a whiteboard and have a proper conversation. But most importantly, I think so many of the approaches that we have been working in innovation, like human-centered design, behavioral insights, ethnography, anthropology, and all this kind of stuff requires physical interaction, being in the space, being immersed where our beneficiaries and users are. And the transition to the extent possible, it's very difficult to imagine now, to what extent we will be able to substitute it through digital interaction is a big question for me. I really, because we are social animals in a way, I really fear that some precious interaction will be lost in this transition to digital. And that will undermine, in a way, some of the things we've been working on. Soraya and I were talking about being user-centered, engaging users and so forth. I don't believe it will be so easy to do digitally now, especially when many of people with whom we are working on are really marginalized from the digital perspective, don't have meaningful connectivity and so forth.
Azim, if I may add on to Alex's point on that, I think one of the key things that we're missing out in terms of the digital interaction is the kinesthetic interaction. And I think that becomes this key point in terms of when people learn. So with digital interaction as we are doing now, it's really predominantly auditory. So even from a visual perspective, you're not seeing the individual as a whole. And for many, if you don't switch on your videos and things like that, you can't see, you can't get those facial cues, the body language, you're absent in that aspect. So the degree of learning that can actually happen is very much restricted, I think. And that's where, if we are to, I think, reduce that aspect of it, the physical interaction, I think our learning, the level of creativity that's going to be able to be determined or be given out by an individual is going to be restricted. So I think that's something that we really need to, I think, really address or think about moving forward, because it's not really just people working on the computers, but it's like, what level of engagement are you able to get from the individual? What level of creativity are we be able to access from the talents within your own organization? And that's a key issue which a lot of organizations need to think about. And it's really about building upon each other's ideas. The whole, as Alex said, you need to be able to touch something, to hold, to have the conversations, because those are the things which really, I think, add value and people can build upon.
Right. Magnus, you like to add on to this conversation? Yes.
Yeah, I think these are very valuable insights, and looking back, I think the last year, I think that we've seen a tremendous learning curve, collective learning curve of an unprecedented scale. I think in terms of adjusting our social and work behaviors to this new environment, and I think that is I mean, if there's something positive that's come out of this, is that we actually had to go through this transition and learn a new way to interact. Now, the next wave of learning on this is when we go back to normalcy. And I do think that we start to reflect upon what is the value of the physical meetings, because they will be more, let's say, they will be more effortful, they will be more expensive, and so on. So we will think more carefully about what is it we value about a physical meeting, so that it's worthwhile to do the extra effort and have those meetings. And I'm sure that we will have a great balance. And in the end, we would have learned a lot about what we value with meetings, and what you're pointing at, Soraya, in terms of what is it we are missing when we are having a digital conversation. But also from physical meetings, it's actually much more, it's cheaper, it's more effective to have a digital meeting. So that learning has been tremendous, I think, on a global scale that we have not seen before. And I think we can leverage that for innovation going forward. We can more effectively decide when to interact digitally, when to interact physically, and that will be to our advantage. So I see very positive outcomes with, at least from that particular aspect of what has happened recently.
All right. So I'd like to open the floor for questions or any feedback. You can share your point of view if you wish to do so as well. Anybody from the floor? All right. I have another questions for the panel. I think a few months back, I can't remember when it was, I read an article that Indonesia, one of the ASEAN countries, is thinking of replacing some of its senior ministers, senior government officials with algorithms using AI for some decision making, because we're already doing a lot. We are already relying on a lot of AI or machine learning algorithms on our day-to-day life. So specific areas, I think it is possible. My question for, I think, the panel members is, what's your view of the concept of exponential government? It can be quite scary. I think Singapore is spearheading in this area, where when you actually park by the roadside where you're not supposed to park, within 5 minutes you get message on your phone and you get a fine. So they're doing algorithmic regulation, enforcement, etc. When all the data is merged, you know, everything is real time. The pressure for policymakers to move fast is high. Citizens expect a lot more from the government. So like just to have a discussion on what's your view of the concept, on the concept of exponential government. I think Alex, maybe you can share with us. I think you had shared some data just now. I think Canada is doing something. A lot of countries are actually sharing their data to allow for this to happen.
Yeah, I think that was a different example, but thanks for this question. I have, just from the top of my head, 2 concerns about it. And actually, at this point of time, I would rather be skeptical of this approach rather than optimistic about it. I think one of the things is that, and we already know, so many of the decisions that are made by the algorithm have an inherent bias due to the way how they were programmed, right? We see this kind of things showcasing themselves so negatively in, for instance, in social assistance, in different social credit schemes and all that, right? So imagine escalating or elevating this approach at the national level. I would think we would unexpectedly, in a way, see a lot of this kind of a consequences or effects that we didn't expect when we would be kind of designing the solution. I think the second thing You remember that I started my presentation by importance not only of the digital technology, but also of trust to respond effectively to crisis. And beneath that is some sort of a democratic process, I mean, not elections, but in trust and interaction between government and citizens, those who make decisions on behalf of citizenry, right? Even using their inputs and so forth. So I believe who elected or would put this trust in algorithm, how we would approach when mistakes are being made by algorithm, right? I just think it would be quite at this point of time, very tenuous way to go into this without looking at all the consequences, both ethical, political. So I think there is much more yet to be done on this, to research the implications, and to actually, for public sector, to catch up with the developments that have been happening in this area. That was very much led by private sector, and I think going to capabilities and skills conversation we had with Surya is that this is something where so much of things were outsourced from government elsewhere, that the government actually lost capability to regulate, to understand what is going on, and to build consensual governance framework around this. So before moving into algorithm as ministers, I would really pay more attention to the governance of AI.
Okay.
Yeah, Surya, over to you. What's your view of this? Magnus, yep.
Magnus, would you
Okay, Soraya, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Go ahead, Magnus.
Okay. No, to your point, Alex, I'm just think about what are the benefits of going exponential or artificial intelligence and these tools that we're seeing now emerging. And I do think that we can use this to address, maybe at least from our perspective, we see there is a legitimacy gap emerging when governments are doing the wrong thing. There are welfare, fraud, and so on taking place in government. And I do think that these instruments should be best applied in terms to restore this legitimacy gap, in terms of providing transparency for citizens, for example, but also to identify and combat fraud in different ways, where money are being lost, taxpayers' money are being lost without any oversight and insight. And also for the equal treatment, so that citizens are kind of aware of that subsidies, money, the different regulations and so on are deployed in an equal way, and that everybody is treated fairly. I do think these technologies have a high potential in actually restoring that. On the other hand, I do see that there could be an increase of control of tracking of people, individual people, and so on. And I do appreciate in some societies it's a good thing that you get a fine really quickly if you park in the wrong place. But from a citizen's perspective, that might be, okay, I cannot go anywhere without being watched and so on, even if you shouldn't park at that particular place. But there are privacy concerns and so on. So I think there's a careful balance for deploying these technologies so that we can maintain or even strengthen legitimacy of government, and not moving too far into dealing with or moving into privacy issues, control issues, and so on. At least that's what we are seeing. And just my final comment, and that goes to your starting point, Alex. I do see that, and I'm working with several government agencies here in Sweden. They have innovation high on their agendas and so on. There are many fundamental things that needs to be put in place first before more, let's say, elaborate or advanced technology should be applied. And I do think that sometimes they get a little bit distracted by, okay, let's do this new fancy technology. But there are other basic things in terms of dealing with, their regular tasks and assignments that needs to be fixed. So quality in processes in government, I think is still key. So if we are kind of jumping over that and start to work with these new technologies, I think there could be a mistake. So we need to do both, ensure quality in the processes that we have and deliver what citizens have the right to expect, and then add and enhance with these technologies. So yeah, those are my comments.
Right, Soraya, I'll pass the mic to you, and I think you can end the session as well because it's close to 6 already. Okay.
I think just on that note, one of the key things I think that we need to think about, and I like Magnus's point of view in terms of the balance, right? Because on one hand, I don't know whether our governments are ready for the level of transparency. So based on our work, what we've done within organizations and in terms of them instituting innovation management, right, through softwares and things like that, which gives that level of transparency within the organization in terms of performance, whether individual or more importantly, level of performance of their leaders. Now, for a lot of organizations, the readiness to accept that level of transparency is a big issue because you've always sort of comfortable sort of dealing from behind the curtains where people can't really see things. And so I think for governments, it's even a bigger step for them to have that level of transparency being so apparent. Now, the other thing, when we've got too many algorithms or when algorithms sort of encroach too much upon things, what we've seen is in Singapore when they used to have a lot of rules, and where I think if we were to look back to about almost 10 years ago, Singapore had a rule for almost so many things on everything. You cannot chew chewing gum, you cannot cross the road here, you can't do this, you can't do that, this is what you can do, this is what you can't. I think what they saw inherently was the level of creativity which was reducing within the society because you were controlling everything. So I think that's the other thing which we need to contend with to find the right balance, because we know, I think being within this sphere, moving ahead, what is going to be critical for any organization to sustain is creativity. Creativity is going to be one of the key competencies which is going to be required.
Sorry, just quick one. Alex, you raise your hand. You have something to add on?
I think, I don't know, maybe there was a breakup when I was speaking, but I feel a bit that maybe my points were not I didn't go exactly across how I intended. I think what I wanted to say, that particular question, allowing algorithms to take place of the ministers, I think I would be very scared and skeptical about it. And I gave a couple of reasons why. I don't want to strike as a technophobic, neither that I'm kind of a technological evangelist. I think all my presentation was about actually being very cautious about things around technology and not being driven by technology alone. So I just want to kind of reemphasize this point. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think back to that, I think we always need to take this very balanced approach, I think, whether it's from a public sector perspective or from an organization perspective. And have that, I think, view in terms of how much control do we put in and how much, I think, how much we allow things to be done freely, right? How much empowerment do we actually give? So I think with that, it's 6:02. I would like to thank all the participants here and especially our speakers, Magnus and Alex. Thank you very much for joining us, for agreeing to be on the panel, and for all our guests. Thank you very much for spending the evening with us. We really appreciate your time with us. We really hope that it was a fruitful session and a fruitful discussion for you to take away for your own organizations, for your own whatever entities that you're heading, right, for the next decade to come in terms of growing exponentially. So thank you very much again. Any other last words from the speakers?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
I think since we are talking about the next decade, it's to be continued, right?
Yes.
Right. So thank you
Bye.
very much. Have a good evening, everyone, and have a good day, Magnus.